Hello, welcome everyone. I want to welcome you to our webinar about the ins and outs of renting your ADU. This webinar is being co-hosted by the ADU Resource Center of San Mateo County and HIP Housing, which are two nonprofits that operate in San Mateo County. My name is Anna Alexeyeva, and I'm the director of the ADU Resource Center of San Mateo County. My co-presenters today from HIP Housing will introduce themselves shortly. But before that, I want to talk you through the agenda for today. So today we want to walk you through some of the things that you should know if you're interested in renting your ADU. This is whether you already have an ADU on your property or if you're thinking of building an ADU for the purposes of renting it out. We know that based on the last survey of statewide ADU owners across California, the majority of ADU owners do rent their ADUs out. So this is a really popular use case for ADUs while also being a really valuable and an important way to add rental units to our community, which is so economically vibrant and job rich. So today we'll talk you through some of the basic things you should know when you're thinking about or before you rent your ADU. We'll review landlord-tenant law and how it might apply to you. We will talk about a unique home sharing program that HIP Housing runs in San Mateo County that connects landlords to tenants. And finally, you'll hear directly from a homeowner who has been on the landlord side of the equation about her experience. A few housekeeping notes before we get started. There is a Q&A feature enabled in today's webinar. So if you do have questions as we're going through the content, feel free to pop them into the Q&A. We'll try to monitor them and do our best to answer them via chat. And if we do have time at the end of today's session, we will answer them live. If you would like the session translated into another language, you can click the CC button at the bottom of your screen and choose what language you would like to receive translation into via the captions. And if you do stick around with us to the end, we're going to have a very short 1-minute survey about the webinar. We'd really appreciate it if you could fill it out. So now, with that housekeeping out of the way, I'm going to pass the mic over to Laura to introduce herself and set the stage for why we think this is such an important topic to be discussing, particularly in San Mateo County.
Thank you, Anna. Good evening, everyone. My name is Laura Finucchi. I'm the Director of Programs at HIP Housing. We are a San Mateo County-based nonprofit organization, and I'll be speaking a little bit later on about the work that HIP Housing does in the community. So I just wanted to kind of set the stage for our housing challenges here in San Mateo County. We are unfortunately one of the most expensive counties to reside in the country. And our county is a little bit challenged in terms of developing new housing. In fact, about 75% of our land here in San Mateo County is protected open space. And so the development of new housing and finding the land to do that in is very challenging here in our community in San Mateo County, which starts up in Daly City and it goes all the way south down to East Palo Alto and covers all of the coast between Pacifica and Pescadero. And in San Mateo County, we have, tremendous job growth. I mean, we've added over 100,000 new jobs here within the last, 4 to 5 years, but we haven't kept up with the demand to produce enough housing in order to accommodate the need for individuals who, work here in our community. In fact, of the over 300,000 people who work here in San Mateo County, 63% of them commute from outside of the county. So they really have very challenges being invested in our community, especially teachers and school district personnel and firefighters and our service workers really have long commutes, and it's really challenging for them to be able to, to contribute to our community by living here in our community. I wanted to include this slide because these are folks that HIP Housing sees often inquiring about our services and sort of giving you an idea about what their hourly wage might be, what their annual income might be, and what income category they fall into here in our county. They say that if you're spending no more than 30% of your income on housing costs, then your housing is deemed affordable. But you can see here that even our grocery clerks and our baristas, at the annual income that they're earning, for them to rent their own unit in here in our community, their own apartment, which kind of on the lower end might be a $2,000 a month studio apartment, they're spending way over 81% of their income on housing costs. And so, we're really trying to create more affordable housing opportunities for members of our community by either helping them home share or through the production of ADUs, really keeping rents reasonable to help accommodate our workforce here in San Mateo County.
Thank you, Laura, for setting the stage. That's such an important point to make around why, like I said, this conversation is very important, and the opportunity to rent your ADU would be beneficial to you as a homeowner, but absolutely beneficial to members of the community or want to be members of our community. So now I'm going to talk about the getting started with renting your ADU. But before I do, if we could go on to the next slide, I do want to share a little bit about the ADU Resource Center, which is, like I said, a nonprofit that provides tools and resources to homeowners who are interested in building an ADU to make the process easier and more accessible to you. So if you are a homeowner who has not yet built an ADU on your property, or you're considering maybe building another ADU, because you can do that now, I really encourage you to check out our website. It's smcadu.org, where there are a number of resources from step-by-step guides to an ADU calculator, floor plan inspirations, stories from neighbors who have built ADUs. This is one resource that I wanted to highlight. It is our ADU guidebook, which is a step-by-step guide from learning the rules through design, permitting, construction, into move-in, which of course is the topic we're going to be focused on today. So the nuts and bolts, soup to nuts of the ADU process, geared particularly towards the San Mateo County context. So if you're thinking of building an ADU, are not sure where to start, this is the resource for you. Next, I wanted to share the ADU calculator, another proprietary tool we have on our website, which lets you put in some information about your ADU project, your prospective ADU project, and get a sense of what the project costs would be based on specific information, both about the project and about where you live. And lastly, I'm very excited to share that we are going to soon be launching a free feasibility consult service that is going to be available to residents of most jurisdictions within San Mateo County. So again, this is if you're thinking of building an ADU, but are not sure if it's right for your property, right for you. This will be a free feasibility consult, including a virtual site visit and some recommendations that you'll get at the end. So if you are interested in that, learning more about educational resources like this kind of webinar, the feasibility consults, other things we have coming down the pike, do please connect with us on social media or on our website. You can sign up for the newsletter at the URL that you see here. So with that, I'm going to shift over to what you need to know before you rent your ADU. So a few preliminary steps we want to talk through first. The precursor to renting out your ADU is getting a certificate of occupancy. This is going to be from your local building department, and for that you're going to need an inspection. The inspection is going to ensure that your unit is habitable, that it meets fire safety regulations, and it meets structural integrity standards. You also want to think about getting landlord insurance. This is insurance that's specifically intended to protect property owners who rent out their properties. There are different models that you can get, but typically it can include property coverage, liability coverage. This is if your tenant is injured on the premises, loss of rental income. For example, if your unit becomes uninhabitable because of storm damage or fire damage. And then there are additional coverages that are available that you can shop around for depending on what you're looking for, like coverage for theft and vandalism. It is also good practice once you've selected a tenant to require that they get renter's insurance for themselves. And this not only protects you, but it protects them from and helps them avoid paying damages on the property, particularly if they're not directly at fault. And finally, you're going to want to confirm that the ADU has a mailing address. So if you've built an ADU, you will have likely received a mailing address during the permitting process, but you do want to make sure that there is an address set up for the property before you rent it out. Next thing we want to talk about is utilities. So this is a topic that, of course, comes up a lot. You'll get questions about it from tenants. If you have shared utility meters, you must disclose that those utility meters are shared before the lease agreement is signed. One thing I want to note, and again, this is for those of you who might not have built an ADU yet or are in the process of building an ADU, and those of you who have built an ADU recently will be well aware of this, but utilities can be complicated and can add costs to the project. So it's something you should be aware of in advance and think about whether you want separate utilities or what that's going to look like. For example, with electric meters, you may not be required to get an electric meter. It'll depend on the circumstances, but you may want to get a separate electric meter. And if that's the case, you should know that PG&E lead times can be very long, in the range of a year, and can add a pretty substantial cost to a project in the range of $20,000. So if utilities are separate, ask for proof from your utility company that the utilities have been placed in your renter's name. This will, of course, simplify the payment process. It'll take the administrative burden off of you. And you always want to be clear in the lease agreement, in discussions with your prospective tenant, about how charges for shared utilities are going to be apportioned. Next, we want to talk about managing your rental unit. So one thing you should be thinking about early on is how the management of the unit is going to fit into your lifestyle and into your financial circumstances and goals. Keep in mind that under state law, it's your responsibility as a landlord to keep the unit habitable and to manage long-term repairs. You should be prepared to be the first line of contact whenever things go wrong. So it's always good practice to have your go-to maintenance person, your go-to electrician, your roofer, your exterminator, etc. So when an issue arises, you immediately have a point of contact. Keep in mind that unless there's an emergency, you need to give your tenant 24 hours of notice before you or any maintenance people enter the property. So given the fact that you'll be the first call, first line of duty, you should consider whether it makes sense for you to get a property management company to manage your unit. Property management companies can do everything from prepare leases to help you find tenants, lease up, collect rent. Of course, these services do come at a price, and property management firms can charge anywhere between 5 to 10%, sometimes more depending on the firm, of monthly rental income. But when you're sketching out how your rental income will fit into your broader financial picture, this is something that you're going to want to consider whether this cost makes sense for you. And now we're going to move on to talk about landlord-tenant law, and I'm going to pass the mic to Tatiana.
Hello, thank you. My name is Tatiana Avila, and I work with HIP Housing. I am the Director of Property Management in our division. I will be talking a few slides with regards to just rental laws. And the first slide that we have here, it's rental laws and federal laws. Most importantly, what I want you guys to understand from this slide is that when you are going through any applications for prospective applicants for your ADU, you have to understand that pay attention to the fair housing law, right? And that just prevents any discrimination from any of the protected classes. Some of the classes are the race of the applicant, the ethnicity, the sex of the applicant, sexual orientation, family marital status, and their age. It's imperative that you do pay attention that they don't feel discriminated, because if they do, then they can file a suit against this. So just be fair across your application screening and you won't run into this issue. The next slide is really talking about the Tenant Protection Acts. And We have the state laws, and then we also have your local ordinances that you have to pay attention to. So the state law, the Tenant Protection Act, establishes a minimum state standard where if units are built within the last 15 years, they're exempt of this, but there are other implications as well. You just have to be up to date with that. And then local law, you definitely need to ask your local jurisdiction about potential laws that might be applicable. Any rent stabilization, which would prevent you from increasing rent for a certain amount or a percentage. If they have specific eviction protection laws, restrictions on short-term rentals, minimum lease terms. So you need to be well versed in that. Some important resources are embedded in the link. It's the California Tenants Guide to Residential Tenants and Landlord Rights and Responsibilities. And then there's the San Mateo County Department of Housing website. And depending on which city you live in, there are other city housing department ordinances that you have to look up specifically. And then the security deposit is something that I wanted to highlight also, is because a lot of times folks don't process security deposit on time or what have you, and that becomes a very big issue. However, security deposits cannot be non-refundable, which means if they've provided a security deposit, whether it be $1,000, let's say, you have a certain amount of days that you have to return that money to them per law. And you have to return it less any damages or, anything that you're going to assess towards that security deposit against. The law limits how much you can also charge for the security deposit, depending on whether the unit or the ADA is going to be furnished or unfurnished, and whether it's going to have a water bed as well. Again, you can charge an application screening fee in addition to the security deposit as well. And the application screening fee is non-refundable, and you can use that towards screening the person. So running the criminal credit background checks, any, income verification if it has an income threshold and all that stuff, so that you can retain. That is not refundable, sorry. And then information about pet fees and deposits. Sometimes landlords don't want to allow pets. You definitely want to check with the city ordinances, because there are some new laws that came out stating that landlords now cannot deny pets in homes. So just find out with your city if that's permissible or not. However, should you choose to allow pets at your ADU, you can definitely charge a monthly pet fee, and you can charge a deposit. Now, the deposit is only used if the animal, the pet, does damage the ADU, and then you can definitely assess those damages against that deposit. Otherwise, it is refundable. You'll give that money back to them. Some of the common landlord-tenant issues I wanted to highlight are the ones that we see in our department. And rent increases is always an issue of topic, because, they start saying, well, I didn't get an increase at my job, so why should I pay more in my rent, right? But unfortunately, when I'm dealing with my units, it's at a larger scale of expenses, right? So we warrant the issue of having to increase the rents, but you as well will have that same concern. So just have a sound explanation, and be clear as to the reasons why. Again, going back to basing any rent increases that it cannot exceed any of the stabilization ordinances that you may have in your city. So keep that in mind. Another one is lack of communication. Just have everything in writing. I would steer away from having any verbal agreements, because a lot of times they can say, oh, well, it wasn't expressed to me. And you're like, no, I wrote it down on my notes. It was expressed, but that lack of communication or ambiguity on the terms, that could be an issue. And so just, make sure that you have it in writing. Property maintenance and repairs if they've reported something to you as a landlord, it's, your responsibility to make repairs and ensure that the unit is habitable. So make sure that you do perform any repairs or preventative maintenances on your ADUs on a timely manner as well. Security deposit disputes, we see that often where they say, no, I don't owe that damage. So just make sure that it's all documented and you have estimates from any vendors or contractors that's going to do that repair. Or you take photos, like we always take photos before someone moves in and after. We've recently had a dispute for a security deposit where the resident said that the carpet was not dirty, when she gave it to us. However, we installed new carpet, so we knew that those stains were performed by her. So we had photos and we had invoices to show for that. So just make sure you document it. Eviction disputes, depending on the type of eviction that you're going to go into, it could cost filing fees with the courts is about $450, depending on what it is that you're going to evict them for. If it's for non-payment or if it's for behavioral concerns, noise complaints, those type of issues. So just make sure that you understand if you can file it yourself. However, we use an attorney service just to do the filings for us. But you do see eviction disputes. Since I've been in my department, I will tell you in the last 2 years, we've only had 2 eviction cases. And again, it depends. One was for non-payment, the other one was for nuisance. But it does occur, it does happen, but not as often. So don't get discouraged, please. Some other common landlord-tenant issues are due to late or unpaid rent. They just don't pay it on time, or they have an excuse every month. So just make sure that if it's late or if it's unpaid, just address it as it occurs. Because if you allow it to continue without you addressing it, then you've established a relationship of pay when you want to. And if you're going to evict them because of unpaid rent, that's what the court's going to ask. Well, where are your notices? Did you serve them a notice saying, hey, you need to pay your rent, or was it just verbal, right? So just that's a common dispute that they have. Unauthorized subletting or unauthorized occupants is another one. So if you see that they are allowing other folks to be in their unit or in their ADU without your consent, make sure that it's documented. Make sure that you make them aware that they've breached their lease by allowing other folks into the ADU. That's to have it on record. And then going back to that fair housing slide, discrimination in tenant selection. So I'm going to rent it to this person because they're Asian, but I'm not going to rent it to that one because they're white, Caucasian. So just be careful. You can't discriminate based on just their parents or maybe where they work. You need to have a selection criteria, meaning if it's going to be based, the rent, a ratio between their rent income, or whatever it is that you decide that selection criteria is, make sure that you follow it so that you don't fall in a situation where the applicant has or the tenant has stated that you discriminated them. And then unauthorized entry by landlords. That could be tricky. Even though you own that land, that property, you've established a tenant-landlord relationship. So that tenant does have rights over that ADU, that unit. So anytime you need to enter their units, make sure that you give them no less than 24 hours. That's what the law states. And you can give them more than 24, of course. We always like to give ample notice if it's, something that is a preventative maintenance or what have you. So always no less than 24 hours. Or let's say, for example, if it's a situation where it's an emergency is as it occurs. You don't have to, you don't have to ask for permission. Just notify them that you're entering. Let's say, for example, you walk by your ADU and then you see water coming through the door, seeping under the door. Of course, you're going to just go in, right? You'll knock, make yourself known that you're walking in, and then just rush to the emergency. Other than that, it should be 24 hours emergency, 24-hour notice if it's not an emergency. And then noise complaints, neighbor disputes, if somebody gets too rowdy, too loud. And then you also have to address that and make sure it's in writing, make sure you have a time, date, and then the action, the behavior, right? And then make sure that that's all in writing to them. Above all, document, document, document. That is my phrase that I tell all my staff. If it's not documented, it never happened. And unfortunately, there's been many instances where they fail to document in the past, and unfortunately, it doesn't get addressed, and then you have to wait until it happens again. So just to protect yourself, document if something happens, and that way you have your grounds of that open communication, and then they don't, they can't say, oh, well, I've never been communicated. So just document. Issues have different legal implications and resolutions depending on local laws and lease agreements. So just make sure that your lease covers, it's a good lease, it's going to be covering all those things, and make sure that your local laws also are taken into consideration before any lease agreement is made. And that's it for me. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Tatiana. Tatiana and her team do an amazing job at HIP Housing and managing over 500 units of affordable housing through our organization. So, I'm going to take the next section and talk with you a little bit about HIP Housing's home sharing program and our role in helping to connect home providers that have extra space in their home or an accessory dwelling unit with a tenant who is seeking housing. So by way of introduction, our organization's name is HIP Housing. HIP stands for Human Investment Project. And we've been in the community now for over 50 years, and our mission is to invest in human potential by improving the housing and lives of people in our community, which we solely focus on San Mateo County. So just a little introduction to HIP Housing. We have our longstanding home sharing program, which I'm going to talk a little bit more about. We also offer a self-sufficiency program for families with dependent children and transitional age foster youth. We provide a year to 5 years of housing to the family, where the adult in the family is enrolled in school and doing job training. We also have a housing readiness program, which counsels older adults on how to apply for affordable housing and conducts case management support for older adults. And the division that Tatiana and her team manage is our property development and property management division, where we own and manage over 500 units of affordable housing throughout San Mateo County. So in a given year, we provide housing to over 1,200 people in our community. So our home sharing program, which falls under our ADU match program, is really a program that's kind of on different levels of spectrums in terms of the affordable housing or the housing landscape here in our community. So on one end, we have homeowners that have extra space in their homes, and on some other ends, we have market rate apartment availability. And where HIP Housing comes in is we're providing really affordable housing to low-income individuals in our community. And our home sharing program is kind of the magic in the middle, where we're really serving the greatest number of clients that apply to our services. And we serve a wide range of clients in our home sharing programs of all income levels, not only low income levels. We have sometimes higher income home providers that match with lower income individuals in our community. So the way that HIP Housing's home sharing program is, working throughout our community is we have what we call our home provider, and that could be a homeowner or it could be a renter, provided they have permission from their landlord to, find a tenant to move in to share the space. And most of our home providers are older adults. They may live alone in their home, or they may have low mortgage balance, but they may be living on fixed incomes, and they have either extra space in their home or they have an accessory dwelling unit on their property. And when I say accessory dwelling unit, it could also be what's called a junior ADU, which is actually can be part of the home reconfigured to make it a little bit of a separate space. Our home seekers really vary. We have older adults who are looking for housing. We have our workforce that are looking for housing. In fact, I think about 11% of the applicants that apply to our home sharing program are affiliated with a school district, either teachers or school district personnel, have a really challenging time finding housing in our community. And usually our home seekers who apply to the home sharing program are usually a single person, a couple, or maybe a single parent with one child. Our home sharing program, as I mentioned, works with folks that have rooms for rent in their home or JADUs in their home or detached separate units. And we facilitate two kinds of matches. One is where the home seeker pays rent. And we helped the home provider kind of generate an idea about what they want to charge for rent. And based on like the population of the clients that we're working with and what we see are rents that our clients are able to afford. And then the other is called a reduced rent exchange, where it's possible that the home seeker might be exchanging some extra household or property duties for a little bit of a lower rent. And that's usually with a senior home provider who might need a little extra help with some grocery shopping or maybe watering or doing a little bit of gardening or sometimes doing some errands. And then they still charge rent, but they charge a little bit lower rent in exchange for those extra household chores. Every city in the state has to create what's called a housing element, which is a state mandated housing plan for how to address creating affordable housing in that community. And HIP Housing's home sharing program is part of every city's housing element to really encourage communities to take a look at how home sharing can really increase the supply of affordable housing in our community. And our ADU match program is also part of that. So we, ADUs are also a way for communities to increase their supply of affordable housing, especially smaller communities like Atherton or Hillsborough or Woodside that don't have often a lot of capability of constructing a lot of, multifamily housing. And so ADU production is really a way to help meet some of the affordable housing goals set forth in their particular city. So the way that our home sharing program works is that folks can self-refer to the program. They can contact our organization either through our website or by contacting our office directly. Staff field those inquiries and they talk with the home provider or the home seeker about their situation, what they're offering, what they're seeking in terms of their housing. And if it's a match for our program, we schedule a time for one of our home sharing coordinators to meet with the prospective applicant. And we can do that in various ways. We can either do an appointment virtually. The client can come to our office in San Mateo and meet with one of our staff, or especially for home providers, we prefer to do a home visit so we can get to know the space, get to see the space, get to see the property, do kind of an inspection of the unit to ensure that it meets the standards of what we prefer our home providers to provide. Every applicant to our program is assigned to one of our home sharing coordinators, and we have 3 of them, and they each take a particular part of the community. So we have a North County home sharing coordinator, Mid and South County coordinator. And so each one of our housing coordinators has a caseload of clients who are offering housing in those communities, and then seekers who want to move into those communities. We also provide every client with a resource packet. So sometimes folks aren't quite sure what questions to ask of prospective tenants or prospective housemates. And so we have a checklist of questions that we encourage folks to go over when they're first talking over the phone, and then when they meet in person. We also ask all of our applicants to provide us with 3 character references. And so we have a list of questions that we encourage our clients to ask when they're checking each client's references. HIP Housing also, as part of our application process, we do a local San Mateo County background search and a national sex offender database check. And as I mentioned, we asked for 3 character references from both the home provider and the home seeker. We feel like it's important to have an equitable screening process for both. And for our home seekers, we do ask for proof of their income. And that's a way for us to kind of understand like their income stability, and to determine like how much are they earning in terms of their income and how much they can truly be able to afford for rent. So our home sharing staff, based on kind of key criteria, like the location of the ADU, what city it's in, how much the rent is, does the homeowner prefer a non-smoker, or is the unit furnished or unfurnished? So some of those key criteria helps us to kind of narrow the search of potential tenants, which we then tell the home provider about. And then we encourage the home provider to contact the individual and set up a time to meet with them and show them the unit, and then, go through an interview process. So we really leave it up to the clients involved to select each other, and then to let us know if they want to proceed with the match. We help to fill out what we call an ADU agreement, which acts as a lease, which kind of goes through everything that's involved with sharing a property, and also the ADU unit, and then also information about what the rent is, the deposit, the terms of notification, how to maintain the unit, the return of the deposit, and all those sort of legal landlord-tenant aspects to renting to somebody. And then after clients match, we continue to check in with them and follow up. So we make a commitment to check in at least every 3 months with both the home provider and the home seeker to ensure that the match is going well. And at any time during the tenancy, either party can contact our organization for support. So here's sort of a slide about who contacts HIP Housing for housing support. So it's just a wide range of individuals in our community that include our workforce. Lots, as I mentioned, a lot of school district personnel, a lot of healthcare personnel. We have also a lot of older adults who are looking for housing as well. Sometimes older adults are in a stable housing situation for many years, and then something suddenly happens to that housing situation. And so we're seen as really a resource to kind of help them through their journey and being able to locate housing. So setting the rent, as I mentioned earlier, we do have conversations with the home provider about what they are thinking of charging for their ADU. Most of our home seekers can pay up to maybe $2,000 for a rent for an ADU. And it's really, for us, we really see our program as a way of providing affordable housing in our community. And we really are hopeful that, our home providers are charging a rent so that our clients can spend no more than 30% of their income on housing costs. And, we don't expect all of our home providers to know like what everybody can afford to pay. So there are some tools on how to understand what the different income level categories are in our community, those that are 30%, 50%, and 80% of area median income. But of course, we understand that most of our home providers have a financial need as well. And so we help them to decide like what would be a reasonable rent to charge for the unit. And, these are just a slide in terms of like how ADUs really benefit our community for home seekers. It can really keep their housing costs very affordable. We as I mentioned, we love to keep our workforce here local so that they can be invested in our community, really cuts down on air pollution and transportation issues, and just to really improve their quality of life. And for our home providers, it can provide them with extra income, extra security, knowing that somebody else is on the property. They put that space to good use by opening up to somebody in our community who's looking for housing. And it's a very solution-oriented arrangement, not only for our clients, but also our community as well. And this is just an example of our inquiry form on our website at hiphousing.org. These are just different ways that folks can contact us either by phone, by email, or to visit our home sharing page on our website. And lastly, there's my contact information. If folks have individual questions that they prefer to ask later on, I can be reached at lfinucci@hiphousing.org. And I see Anna has come back on. Hello, Anna.
Hi, Laura. Yes, we wanted to have just a little bit of dialogue because that's a lot of helpful information. But a question I wanted to ask you is if you can talk a bit more about the rental agreement that you set up between the home provider and the renter, and what are the key components, and what because the analog here is a lease agreement, so anyone who's renting will have to think through this.
Right.
What are your tips, and based on your experience, what do you recommend?
Oh, yeah. I mean, as Tatiana mentioned, documenting everything is really important, and having a lease agreement is vital because, our lease agreement, we call it our ADU match agreement. As I mentioned, it sort of starts off with like, what are some of the areas that really increase sort of compatibility with living on a property together, or even in a JADU, living in a home together, that have to do with like cleanliness and noise level and visitors and quiet hours and chores that have to be done on the property or within the unit. We talk about communication strategies as well, because that's where tenant disagreements can happen, when there's a lack of communication. And whether like the home seeker is communicating with the home provider, or if it's a member of their family, we want to kind of understand like what are those dynamics and who they should be reaching out to. And then, the other part of the agreement is, solidifies what the rent is, what the deposit is, the return of the deposit framework, the ins and outs of maintaining what the landlord's responsibility is in terms of maintaining the property, and all those kind of landlord-tenant matters that are important to include and that everybody needs to understand. And so HIP Housing is a party to completing the agreement with the clients. The clients complete it together, but we can help facilitate a conversation about the completing of the document. And then, when we do our check-ins with clients, it helps us to understand what everything was agreed upon, and if there's any issues that we need to help brainstorm on, that we can refer back to that as well.
So communication is key and documentation is key, as we've heard already.
Yes.
One other question. So Tatiana went through some of this already, but from your perspective, what challenges have you seen between home providers and renters or tenants in your program? And what advice do you have based on those challenges and working through them?
Yeah, I mean, for some folks, some home providers, it might be the first time that they've been a landlord and they've had a renter for their ADU or for their JADU or even in home sharing. And so, there's sometimes disputes about, well, this is my property and this is the way that I want things to be done. And so, that's where like the living together agreement, the ADU match agreement, really comes into play, is just to have a conversation about, the expectations that both parties have. And so really, solidifying those communication strategies and whatnot. So, I mean, so I think, when there's a new home provider that hasn't really had the experience yet renting to somebody, like getting them kind of familiar with things takes a little bit of time. We have some home providers that have been participating in our program for decades, and it's really refreshing because they understand that it's really a collaborative relationship that has to take place to make the match successful.
Absolutely. That makes a lot of sense. Well, I will pass it back to you.
Great. So I wanted to introduce Kathy. She's with us today. I'll have her join us on camera if she has the chance to do that. So Kathy is the daughter of one of our home providers who has an ADU in Atherton. And Kathy, I just wanted to know if you are still on the call. She may be
I'm
having some.
here.
There you
Here I
are.
am. Okay, sorry, everybody. We were just talking about, I'm not sure why my camera is not start video. There we go. Okay,
Okay, there you are. Hi.
talking about the challenges of Zoom.
So hi, Kathy. So for the audience, Kathy, her dad, who wonderful gentleman, they contacted Hip Housing almost a year. Was it almost a year ago, Kathy?
It was spring of 2024. Yeah.
Yeah, so almost
Yeah.
a year ago. And so he's had a tenant in their ADU, and Kathy's been so gracious to come and just share a few words about their experience.
Yeah. So hi, everybody. Thanks for inviting me to talk about the wonderful program that HIP Housing is. As Laura mentioned, I am not the property owner. My 88-year-old father is. He's been a resident of Atherton since the early 70s. And I think my parents were trendsetters because they built an ADU way back in about 1975 for my grandmother to live in. And after she passed away, we had another family member live there. And then my parents decided to rent their ADU. This was on their own. And they had the same renter for 14 years. And my mother passed away in 2022. And we really felt the benefit of having someone on the property because I live 45 minutes away from my dad. And after our renter moved out, we left the unit empty, and there were a few occasions where I couldn't get a hold of him, and I was in panic mode. And we all decided it would be really nice to have someone there, eyes on the ground, boots on the ground, that I could contact if I wasn't able to reach him. So I had stored away a flyer from HIP Housing that was mailed to the house, and I reached out to them, and with the intention of having the rent below market with the understanding that the person would be a contact for me. My dad doesn't really need any physical assistance at this point. But it was just someone to be there because he's alone a lot. And so I reached out to them and explained what I was hoping to get in a tenant. And our caseworker or coordinator, Barbara, came and met my dad and I. And we went through the extensive interview process. She looked at the property, made some suggestions, and we had some work done on it to get it all ready, and uh, it couldn't have been easier. We had a couple of clients, or actually just one client come, and we all decided it probably wasn't the best fit. And then we were contacted again by Barbara, and she introduced us to our amazing tenant, Edith. And I felt an immediate connection with her when I spoke to her on the phone. She was very compassionate and kind and patient. And she came and saw our unit, and we both agreed shortly thereafter that this was going to be a good fit. Um, and Barbara came and helped us complete the living agreement, the living together agreement. We set the rent and did all of those things. But the huge relief to me was not having to list the unit on a public platform like, Facebook or whatever, Zillow, and have to manage interviewing people. And I don't have the time or the bandwidth to do that. And Hip Housing took care of all of that. They did the background checks and the employment history. I did speak to our tenants' references who she provided, but they made it so easy for me as a caretaker for my dad. I can't speak highly enough of their program, and how Edith and Hip have just been a blessing to our family. And I would encourage anyone who is thinking about renting their unit or space in their home to reach out to HIP, because it's an amazing organization.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you, Kathy. How does your dad feel having Edith on the property?
He loves having Edith there. He like watches for her. He's like, oh, Edith's been gone all day. He watches for her car. If he's out in the yard, she stops and talks with him, and she invites him in, they chat. It's just been such a great thing for him. And she's just such a wonderful person that, she, takes the time to build that relationship. So it's worked out so great. I'm so grateful.
And it really enables, your dad to remain in his home, which he's lived in for,
Since
yeah,
1972.
right.
Yeah.
Be able to move. So thank you so much for
Mhm.
sharing your story.
Yeah.
Give it back to you, Anna.
Thank you. Okay, well, we are almost at the end of our time. We didn't get too many questions in the chat, but one note from someone, which was an interesting suggestion that I do want to read out, which is, as a property manager and longtime landlord, I would recommend purchasing a home warranty for the unit, which leverages a plethora of vendors. So that's good advice of something to look into. It's different from homeowners insurance in that the home warranty is a safety net for unforeseen repairs or replacement costs for appliances or systems. So that's something you can definitely look into for your ADU. It's a contract between the homeowner and the home warranty company, and it can provide an opportunity for discounted repairs. So definitely something to think about in addition to insurance and ways to protect yourself from a liability perspective with the ADU, whether you're renting it out or not. So with that, seeing no other questions in the Q&A chat, we can wrap it up. And again, I will ask you if you can stick around for 1 minute to answer a very quick survey about this webinar. And otherwise, we hope you enjoyed today's session. You learned something about renting an ADU, about the HIP Housing Homesharing program, and please get in touch with the ADU Resource Center or with HIP Housing if you have any follow-up questions. We would love to hear from you. Thank you very much, everyone, and have a good night.